can collaboration, imagination, play, and action boost creativity and help prepare students for the future? And what small creative changes can spark a child's interest and shift their mindset? Today, I'm talking to Sarah Childs, an inspiring educator, music teacher, lead practitioner, and part of the senior leadership team at Penryn College. Sarah is at the forefront of creative transformation. In this episode, we will explore some easy practical ideas for teachers who want to bring more creativity into their classrooms. I'm your host, Mary Berseneva, and this is Just One Little Creative Thing. I'm so excited. I mean, I've been waiting to host you for quite a while, and you were one of my, targeted guests because I knew that you're just be the right person to talk to regarding the topic. Tell a bit, how are you, and what are you up to right now at school?
Thanks for inviting us. It's lovely. I'm down here in Penryn College in Cornwall. I'm a member of the senior leadership team as a lead practitioner, and for the last 3 years, I've been working with Arts Council England, leading one of the pilots for the Creativity Collaboratives programme.
What does your job comprise?
So, on a day to day, my job is working directly on the Creativity Collaboratives work, but also I lead on professional development. So, I do lots of the teacher training for staff across the school, and I also work across our partnership, working with 8 of our local primary schools as well. So, quite diverse. I also even teach. So, I teach music, so I teach
Yeah.
everything from 11-year-olds up to 16-year-olds music. I even teach in some of the primary schools, so I do teach some smaller children as well. So yeah, a lovely gift of a job. It's my job. It's delightful.
How did you find I mean, in a bit, like, just it's in particular my personal question. How did you find this calling, and what drives you in what you are doing the
So
most?
I started as a music teacher, and then kind of moved into bits of leadership, kind of became head of faculty for creative arts, and just really loved um, working across the arts. It was just a really special place to be. But equally, I really loved working in partnership with people. So I've always worked with not just local schools, but local partnerships, cultural organisations, and just really enjoyed that network, particularly down here in Cornwall. It's really special. And then over time, I started to do some work for in Cornwall, particularly for teacher training. So I used to do a lot of kind of support around training around music education, and that was really joyful. And I love kind of working with colleagues I might not know as well, or just bump into frequently. So I kind of then found myself in this role working with an SLT at Penryn. Fortunately landed into a place where we were doing the Creativity Collaboratives work for the Arts Council. So that's kind of how I've ended up here, really. But really enjoy developing practice in staff.
Like, along your way, have you encountered something that kind of like was your pet peeve, something that like bugged you, and it's like, oh, I really want to change it, like I wish it was just in a way, and you felt like you want to kind of like patch this hole or contribute in a way? Was it
I think
in your case?
as a music teacher, I always wanted music to be just loved and enjoyed, and a place where young people really wanted to engage in, not necessarily to make them phenomenal musicians and find their career path in music, but actually just to find it as a place where they thrived and they liked it, and they valued everything that it gave them in their education. And so I think I always wanted to then support staff who found that really difficult. I think for some staff, particularly, who might not come from a music background, actually teaching music, that's a big deal. And hats off to every single member of staff that does that in the country, who actually hasn't had lots of music training, because that's a huge ask. And I think I just always wanted to then just help staff and find their way into it, so that they could then help children enjoy it as much as I wanted them to. And I think that's where it came from, really. And it is just that innate want for young people to experience music and enjoy it, and it be a great place for them in their school life.
Hmm. Maybe what kind of maybe some top five things your teach your trainees, yeah, teacher trainees, like kind of like you really want to highlight, um
something that only like you I think like it's just something that you believe in so deeply that you want like to highlight particularly these things, yeah, like transmitting them to like
Oh,
creativity.
that's a good one. I think particularly linked to creativity is an interesting one actually. I've always valued teaching group work in music, whether that's the fact I passionately want children to sing. So I've always done big choirs and just every child sings. It's like an absolute given. There's no question about it. So, for example, here at Penryn, we do a lot of boys singing. We have
Mm.
male voice choirs. So our boys who are still 15, 16, they still sing and they perform. And it's just culturally what we do. And it's that sense of belonging and being part of that community. And I think particularly linked to creativity, it's about that collaboration of working with others, but also slightly putting yourself out your comfort zone. Lots of the young people I work with, they wouldn't want to necessarily get up and perform every day on a stage. That's not what drives them, but they do value being in their team, being in their choir, working with others, and you do what you do together because that's what teams do. And I think so collaboration linked to creativity would be a big one for me. I also think there's something around that communication skill that it brings, whether that's something verbal or non-verbal, doesn't matter. I mean, music's great for that, isn't it? And I think that's why all children can find their place in it. It's not always about having to articulate everything with necessarily quite complex language, for example. They can demonstrate things in different ways. So I think that would be it for me.
And actually, it's I think one of the yeah the core things. Do sorry, you were trained only music teachers, right? You were.
Mm.
But regarding students, like if you were notice that like some of the children they're really like stubborn and they're reluctant to be like a part of like collaborate with others, and actual music it's not their cup of tea at all, how do you make sure that they also engaged? How do you kind of like approach those a little bit
Working
concerning?
with others is a really interesting one, isn't it? And it takes time. It's a skill. It's a skill that needs help to flourish. So, for some young people, suddenly being in a group of 4, 5, 6 other children, that's a big step. So, actually, for example, we do a lot of earlier work around just paired work with lots of scaffold and support, lots of guidance, ideas about how to start, how you might even open a conversation, whatever that might be. And I think if you can scaffold it enough that the children find their little step into it, actually we often find that there aren't many barriers for young people. I passionately teach classical music and world music. I don't hold back on the variety of music I'd expect young people to learn. Um, and as much as I do love teaching them popular music, actually for them that's really hard to navigate because it comes with all the things that they have about the fact they listen to it on the radio or whatever it might be. And sometimes going completely different and throwing them a piece of music they never would choose to have listened to, it's a really good thing for them. And I kind of think that's part of my responsibility sometimes as well.
Do you have this agency, this authority to kind of like be flexible with what pieces are to choose for, or, like?
Yeah, within the national curriculum, absolutely. And we try really hard to give a balanced offer
Mhm.
in terms of our curriculum here, actually. And we've worked really hard on that. So we will, over particularly a 3 year kind of child's time with us, so from year 7 through to the end of year 9, work really hard that they've covered a lot of the musical history, as much of world music as we can foster, and also done popular music, film music, computer gaming. We really try to develop a real broad context for them because they may just go home and listen to one style of music relentlessly, and that's great, but at the same time they might discover something in a music class that they really like and they didn't know they like, or it was something that they listened to at home because their parents listened to it at home, or their grands or their granddads or whatever it might be. And I think that's no, we try really hard, and we do have quite a bit of autonomy about what we would do. So yeah.
Mm. I've recently had a conversation with Matthew or Isherwood. You know that, right?
Yeah.
Perfect. So he meant because he used to be and like illustrator and art teacher as well at school, and one of the things he kind of like mentioned, and he put it like at the like I would say as a cornerstone he said like, well, make sure that you listen to your students, what they actually want, because students, like in his case, they were interested in graffiti and, for example, Banksy, and he tried to incorporate it. How do you make sure in music you listen to your students, what they want?
I've probably a good example of that for us is how we use music technology. Um,
Mm-hmm.
I always love teaching Baroque music. I think children, there's some
Oh,
amazing
it's one of my
repertoire.
favorite Baroque
Yeah,
music.
brilliant. But interestingly, when we teach Baroque music, one of the things we also do is they use computer programming to create their own piece of like ground-based music inspired by Pachelbel's canon, that kind of thing. And I just think that's a really interesting way in, because then actually they can create something not only that's quite complex, but also they can remix it and they can put their own twist on it, and we really encourage them to do that as long as the nuts and bolts of the musical understanding is there, and they're demonstrating some of the elements we're hunting for, actually putting their own flair on that, their own imagination, being playful, as I would talk about in the creative skills. It's really important for them. And if it goes wrong, the nice thing about music tech, if it's not the sound they're hunting for, you just go back a couple of stages, and you go again, don't you? And that kind of being able to develop and shape it. Music tech's been great, for music education for that.
It's true. It's actually gives you a lot of ideas. I know that's something that drove me as a teacher, as preparing the classes and making sure that I do something that would like kind of just hook on students, and it's kind of like, wow, just in this feeling of preparing and to be excited that students are going to be excited about it. It's kind of like
Yeah.
this flare.
Mm.
Um, yeah, I would just thinking that because you were one of I would say pioneers, and in terms of this absolutely brilliant framework, this model of creativity, the 5 dimensions, right, of creativity. Um, and I'm using it, as a part of my portfolio. How, like in your daily practice, just being very practical, how like personally you make sure that you incorporate different parts of creativity? Like is it like risk taking, or like honing new ideas? How does it like look like practically? Like, oh, have I did this, or have I, like have I done this or that?
Yeah, it's been really interesting, not just in my own teaching, but obviously working with the staff in school who've been particularly part of developing this work. And the first thing we started to do was just being more articulate about it with the children. And it wasn't a dramatic changing process or practice in some ways. Actually, a lot of the time was around the language we were using and about them starting to hear the words, oh, you're developing that idea, or there's reflection here, or oh, that was really interesting. You've considered a different possibility here. And we almost in those classes with the staff who particularly were doing, for example, we did action research, those staff just kind of used the language. The students picked it up so quickly. And so, whilst yes, there was we made more effort perhaps to allow more space for imagination or allow more space to take a risk. Actually, a lot of the benefit we noticed was around more the articulation of the language and just being really overt. Oh, that's really interesting. That's what's happened here. Or, oh, can you just think about that? Or explain that to me, and just think about the fact, is that innovative? What have you done there that's different? And that was really quite game changing for us, was around just the use of the language.
Were there like any teachers that like came back to you and they said, oh, actually, like, I really have no time, or like I don't consider myself creative, like I don't really understand anything in creativity. What would you, or like what do you say to them? Um, because just a lot of concern is about just their curriculum being very rigid and teachers having no time to do it. Were there any?
Yeah, and it's interesting. We did a lot of work in our first year for the Creativity Collaboratives program, kind of understanding or trying to
Yeah.
understand what our teachers thought it was. What did creativity mean? We were kind of leaning on some definitions, but we couldn't quite settle on our own. And we were just trying to work it through. And it was really interesting in the first year when we asked staff, what do you
Mhm.
think are the barriers for creativity? And, congested curriculum just came up straight away, lack of time came up straight away, and actually lack of funding to kind of explore it. Now, obviously, we were in that absolute dream situation where we had the time potential and the funding because of the program we were doing with the Arts Council. What staff then started to say was that they needed examples and they needed to know what it was we were talking about, because actually it was almost a bit too abstract in some ways. There was a notion that, oh, it was something in the creative arts and therefore, you know, absolutely lovely, and go to art and music and drama and you'll find lots of creativity. But once we had kind of settled on the 5 creative skills and we were able to talk about our model and share it with staff, actually you could sit within a maths department and a science department and they go, well, this is what we do in science all the time, or this is how we think like an engineer when we're in technology. And instantly the language helped massively, and the staff then were like, well, we do this all the time. You know, I can remember the science department just going, well, this is us, this is what we do. And we're like, I know. And I think, you know, I think there'll always be a challenge over that word creative and creativity. I think it will always continue to have its issues. But I think actually when we look at the depth and the detail what we're talking about, staff very quickly recognise that it has its place in our classrooms. You know, we solve problems all the time. You know, in a maths lesson, we're problem solving. We're exploring possibilities in humanities. You know, if you think about geography and history and religious studies, you know, you're considering consequences of actions all the time, and the staff got it really well, and I think that helped the students get it quickly as well.
Mm-hmm. Just for those who are not aware of this great framework that you just mentioned and the skills, the creative skills, can you remind like what are they, and maybe give a little bit of example, like what do you do or like other departments do too, or like just a little like sneak peek?
So we were super lucky, as you all know, that part of the Creativity Collaboratives programme was we were asked by the Arts Council to work with a university partner, and you know what it's like. You send an email and you never know whether the email is going to land with the right person. And I sent an email to Kerry Chappell going, hi, I'm Sarah, I'm in Cornwall, we've got this slightly crazy idea, what do you think? And from that point, Kerry and Ursula Crickmay, who you know, became our research partners from the University of Exeter. And through their work in year 1, we worked really closely. They did an amazing literature review, and we were kind of in, what's the word I'm hunting for? We're kind of just really supported by all of that learning that loads of people have done before us. And at that point, we started to decide that we needed our own framework that needed to include creative skills. We needed to consider creative pedagogy. And we even in year 1 considered what the progression of that looked like from 5-year-olds up to 16-year-olds. So along with Kerry and Ursula, we also work with teachers and our local industry and cultural partners just to tidy up the language. So our 5 creative skills ended up being dialogue and collaboration, being imaginative and playful, generating new ideas that matter, honing and developing an idea, and empowered action. And in each of those 5 skills, there's kind of like 3 subsections, and I use that really loosely because they're quite broad. So if you take dialogue and collaboration, that would include something like posing questions, answering questions. It would include negotiating that difference. You know, if you're in dialogue with someone and you're not perhaps agreeing and you come from different sides, how do you deal with it? But also it includes that individual and collaborative and being part of a community. So that kind of one creative skill of dialogue and collaboration obviously has quite a bit of depth in it, whereas empowered action, which for us we'd not really considered as a school and as a partnership of schools before, it was a really interesting one, and that was around student agency. You know, I always talk about the students kind of owning it, you know, they really leading on it, and that kind of idea of immersion and risk taking started to appear. So our 5 creative skills, obviously supported by all the research that we'd done in year 1, got kind of developed and honed through the staff here, through talking to the students here. Does that language mean anything to you? What do you think? And also interestingly, by working with our industry partners. So for us, we've been looking particularly about how do these creative skills better prepare young people for their modern workforce and whatever their career path might look like. So we wanted to hear from our industry partners that we're on the right track. You know, is this something they think our young people will need in 10, 15, 20 years time?
When do you have sometimes to justify and like bring examples like that is why we're doing, or maybe you have noticed the fruits of your work, I mean students wise, how do you do you see that wow, this is actually game changing in a way, like just students are completely different? Because I mean I know that you're probably just as Carrie mentioned about her experience of being a student back in school, and she's like, oh, my experience was actually pretty. I mean, I was in a really rigid environment, and there was no creativity during my school years. And then when I became a dancer, that's where it got started. How I mean so you can compare, what would you think that this is just the most obvious fruits the students bring when they're being creative?
I think what was interesting, and it came from a couple of schools before we even started the pilot work, was we'd started to see kind of almost a lack of originality in work. We'd noticed, from primary and secondary, I can remember a primary example and somebody saying, just look, all their paintings look the same. And there's no reason for their paintings to look the same, but the children were kind of not taking risks to do something that was different. And it was interesting as we started to unpick it, it might be something as simple as a teacher, when we share an example, we might just share one example. Actually, if we shared 2 or 3 examples and there was that richness of opportunity just to consider that, how that lands for the child differently, therefore their own work then has that level of kind of imagination and it's a little bit of their personality in it. I think those moments had slightly gone in school life, and that may be because there's been a drive towards a really knowledge rich curriculum's got very, very busy. I think also, not that I like to blame COVID, but COVID really didn't help. And I still find it amazing that we taught children in classrooms that they had a face mask on. The whole of that didn't help. And I think it meant that our children also just found themselves finding group work really tough. They found sharing their ideas really difficult, and it all snowballs. And then what we were starting to hear from our industry partners was they might be coming to them at 16 or 18 with loads of knowledge, brilliant knowledge, but they couldn't apply their knowledge and they didn't know how to adapt their knowledge. And a lot of our people we work with locally were saying that actually they couldn't then shape their ideas or put their knowledge in a different context. And I think we got to the point here where we felt there's a real moral imperative to kind of help our children be able to do that. Brilliant, they've got all the knowledge, but they've then got to go and do something with it, and they've probably got to go and work with other people when they go and do something with it. And that's a skill, and it takes time to develop. And we've got a real responsibility, I think, in education to kind of foster that now. If we know that that is what the future of the world of work is going to look like, actually our children are going to have to be more adaptable than we ever were, and my parents ever were, and my grandparents ever were. And I think that's really important. We consider that now and where its place is in school life.
Mm-hmm. And regarding schools, because I know you work in different schools, right? You know kind of know the scope, what's happening. Do you think kind of what is the current state where we are now in terms of creativity, and whether we where we are heading actually?
Well, gosh, that's a huge question, considering we're obviously in the beginning of a new government at the moment. And I think I like to think there'll be potential in the future that actually this becomes part of what we're doing. If you look at the new, well, it's not so new anymore, the Welsh national curriculum, there's creativity in their thread of their learning, same within Scotland education system. And then if you look around the world, if you look at Australia, creativity is there. And I think we have an opportunity in England to probably do the same now. I think what the Creativity Collaboratives pilot has done, so we're one of 8 national pilots, what the pilot's done is given the Arts Council and colleagues that they work with the opportunity to go look at these examples, look at what teachers are managing to do in their classrooms and how schools are then helping it find its place and that it is possible. we worked obviously through action research in year 2, and I always talk about our head of humanities who really allowed space to take risks in her classroom. And I guess when you allow time to do something differently, the worry is then you don't have time to get all the knowledge. But interestingly, her point was actually the more she allowed creativity to flourish in her classroom, the knowledge got stickier. The children could remember the things that they were trying to learn, and they were able to recall it in 2 weeks later, 4 weeks later. And she was like, that's brilliant. Whether that's because the learning was more memorable, whether it's because the children had applied their knowledge in a very practical way and they'd done it collaboratively with others, it didn't matter. For her, the knowledge stuck. And she very much now has allowed that to grow across her whole department, which is very exciting.
Mm. Well, that sounds really exciting, and I'm so glad that you're doing this job. And I think it's just tremendous, and it's just, I mean, like, it's a huge responsibility to kind of like be, like heading this vessel, like kind of like across this stormy sea, I would say, right? Yeah,
Yeah.
just
And
like
I
being
do think,
someone.
we've not got it all right yet. We're not there. We're still learning a lot. But I do feel there's a responsibility we have to now make sure other people hear what we're doing, even if it just gives people confidence to go and give something a go and try something.
If you could apply one creative thing to teaching, or to recommend a teacher to start with, what would this little thing would be?
Well, my advice is always do something very small. So when people ask me that question, I think people think you have to go big and you bold, and actually you don't. And I don't think it's my music teacher hat on, but I always say probably think around dialogue and collaboration. Think about the place for children talking in classrooms, the place for group work. Um, Reality is with creative skills, you don't do one without absorbing another one along the way. You don't just go after one thing. But what we've found through developing dialogue and collaboration in classes is everything else has kind of followed. And it's been easier because children are then talking about what they're doing, and they're articulating and they're reflecting, and that was our kind of that's been our driver. And particularly we've noticed in other schools that's a really powerful place to start. But keep it really small. It could be just 2 or 3 minutes of paired discussion. It doesn't have to be anything more dramatic. But that over time builds and grows, and really allows young people to flourish. For me, that's like a really essential skill as well.
Beautiful. This is, I would say, yeah, this is so true. That just little things, they kind of like may snowball in, like in such something, and a bigger, like in a bigger picture, like it would be just different thing, because you kind of like already imply your creativity, and it's happening. You just kind of like planting a little seed, right? And it will
Yeah.
blossom soon. Just kind of like keep watering it, right? Keep
Yeah.
watering. We have a tradition on our podcast, and the previous guests, they make a question for the one who is going to follow up. Yeah, and there is a question for you. One of the things you have ever experienced as a learner or as a teacher, the most creative thing you have experienced, either as a learner or as a teacher, or maybe both.
Wow, that's a brilliant question. Say that again. What's the
So,
most
what is the most creative thing you have ever experienced, either as a learner or a teacher, or both?
Oh, that's a brilliant one. Creative thing I've ever experienced or learned.
Take your
That's a
time
really
to
good
think.
one. It would be
Take your time to
something around, I think as a musician, it was always something around improvisation, which I guess is around imagination and play. And as a child, I found that really tricky. As a child musician, I was the girl that read the notes on the page and could sight read, but put me in a place where I had some freedom in my musical expression. I actually just my background wasn't that. And I can remember as I actually came into teaching, improvisation became the thing I used a lot in the classroom. Um, but I just felt so out of my comfort zone. And I can remember doing a workshop, but I can't remember who it was with, which is really sad. It will come to me when we finished, I'm sure. And it was around actually how I developed my own creativity, my own confidence around improvisation, and my kind of creative ideas, to just give it a go. And actually, it's one of the things I now say to training music teachers. Actually, it's quite good if you demonstrate something in front of a class and you're improvising and it just doesn't work. I love that now. But I guess I had to get to that confident place to be able to do that in a class. But I can remember someone teaching it to me going, actually, that's brilliant. That's still the learning. Show them the bits that don't work or that don't sound okay. I think music's got that hang up. It's all got to sound great, and it doesn't. That's a bit not very specific, but I think that would be it for me.
Wow, no, this is beautiful. This is beautiful. Thank you. Thank you. Actually, I think, yeah, I'm so grateful that you're like I got to experience talking to you, because I remember, and I still am very grateful for that lecture we had with you and Ursula and Carrie. It was all about risk taking. It was all about just being vulnerable, and I mean, going blindfolded, because you had kind of like a very interesting task we were making with clay. We were given different facilities, and we were I don't remember actually what particular we had a task for. Yeah, but it was something like experiencing like it with like the first hand, like seeing is believing, and when kind of making creativity, what I've really adored. And I think one of these examples you drew from the very beginning is this zoom in picture
Yeah.
from that was the I think one of the tasks you brought from biology, right? Like some just this was a leaf, right, or something.
Yeah.
Yeah, you kind of like guess what
Yeah.
that is. Yeah, I think there's one thing that kind of like triggered me in a good way, like, wow, this is actually how you can start a lesson. Yeah, this is beautiful. I was just maybe my last question is, how do you start your lessons? Like, how do you like kick your students like creative from the very beginning?
As a teacher, I've always loved to start lessons with sound. And that's not actually mean that they walk in and there's sound, but I think there's a moment where it should start from that place as a music teacher for me. Interestingly, we do a lot of starter activities now, and it's just lovely to allow that headspace for young people just to sit and to listen, and it helps them come into that place of, this is what I'm doing, this is what I'm thinking about today. And sound, I think, help triggers memory, and particularly if I don't see children very often, and then they're coming back in, even if it's something as simple as playing music that they've heard from the previous lesson, just something that helps them get their thinking back into that space, I think is really important. So mine's normally around sound, but I
Hmm.
do like anything that's visual, or just something that gives them the opportunity just to think and consider for themselves.
Hmm. So you mean you play music for them, and do you ask them like to think what is the I don't know, composer, or like
Yeah,
what kind of?
maybe it could be more around the music and what the music's doing.
Hmm.
How's it come here? How does it link to what we've done before? It might be they don't realise at the time it's linking to what they're going to do in the lesson. Just play really clever with it. Um, I think there's just something that helps the memory, isn't there? Anything that's visual, anything that's auditory, I think that it helps. It helps young people a lot.
Oh, I wish there were more like teachers like you, just around England. Oh, not England, just around the world. We really need this force. And like I'm glad that I really experienced it with you, or with this dearest Carrie and Ursula, and who've really like, as captains, I would say, of the ship. And I really do hope that it's gonna flourish soon, and it's going to weave into schools, and it's going to be
Yeah,
adopted.
yeah, it
Yeah.
will. And just lovely to meet you. Thanks for your time.
Thank you for your time. Sarah, it's just amazing. Thank you.
Well, I hope everything goes very well for you in the next couple of weeks, finishing everything off as well.
Oh yeah, yeah, yeah. I'm super excited to work. I mean, I'm very grateful for this work, and just kind of like, but I'm just as a part of, because yeah, you're doing CPD just of our conversation or our podcast. Do you think that podcast has a kind of like power to to kind of like change the picture, because you're doing CPD and I'm considering also podcast is, you know, like the informal way of educating teachers about creativity. Do you think it's kind of
Yeah, I think there's a growing world of podcasts in education, and it's particularly for CPD at the moment. I think there's something around the accessibility of it, and that being able to dip in and out, the time that suits a member of staff, I think is really powerful. I think they're just bite size enough, aren't they? They can give enough, and it's useful. So I think podcasts are great.
Hmm.
Kerry and Ursula and I just did one for the Australian Teacher magazine, so you'll have to check it out. I'll send you the link.
Oh, it's brilliant. It's brilliant. I need to check it out.
I'll
Okay, I
send you the
will.
link.
Wonderful. I'm a huge, actually, myself. I find a podcast. Yeah, so I would love to meet to know more about, especially Australia. It's one of the, right, the creative,
Yeah.
I would say. And so, yeah, yeah, perfect. Thank you. Thank you for your time, Sarah.
Pleasure.
And
Lovely to see you.
yes, have a great rest of your day. And actually, yeah, the academic year.
Yeah,
Yeah,
take
it's just,
care.
yeah, take care. Thank you.
Thank
Hopefully it's gonna,
you.
yeah, thank you. Bye bye.
Bye.
Thank you so much for listening to today's episode. It's such a pleasure to talk to inspiring people like Sarah, and genuinely, I believe that adding a pinch of creativity here and there can change the tapestry of education, equally like adding a pinch of cinnamon or cardamom to our dishes. And if we will start today, and just little by little, nothing dramatic, but it can snowball later on to a great shift. See you in the next episodes. You've been listening to Just One Little Creative Thing.